All right. Hey, friends. It's been a while. I'm a little sick, but I'm on the mend. I might sound a little froggy, but I'm feeling okay. And I figured it was time for another check-in for a couple of reasons. I think there's a few things that are clear at this point that I'm probably ready to attempt to articulate and just assess, just to get a picture of what's going on. And I was looking up a few different videos, but there's really only one that I think is worth starting with. So we're going to watch this short video together, and then we'll talk about it. This is New York Times op-ed contributor. So he's not, employed by the New York Times, but he is a contributor.
You have lost. You lost. The mistake that you made is you let us in the first place. That's the thing with brown people. I'm going to say this as a brown person. There's a lot of us. Like a lot. There's like 1.2 billion in India. There's more than 200 million in Pakistan. There's like 170 million in Bangladesh. Those are just the people there. I'm even talking about the folks who are expats or immigrants. There's a bunch of us. And we breed. We're a breeding people. And the problem is you let us in 1965. There were a few of us beforehand, but once you let one of us in, you know what happens with brown folks? Our grandmother comes, our grandfather comes, our uncle comes, our aunt comes, our cousin comes, our second cousin comes, our third cousin comes. Then we have kids, a bunch of kids. And then guess what? Some white women, the Western civilization women, the pure women, the American women, quote unquote, the Rust Belt women, the real women, they like some of us brown folks. We don't take them. They come to us. So we're embedded. We are everywhere. We are everywhere. I've traveled this country. I'm going to speak as a brown person. Brown people are everywhere. There will be a Patel motel or there will be a Desi restaurant everywhere. I want you to realize this. You have lost. Your story is a shitty story filled with misery. It's filled with bland chicken. It's filled with terrible, terrible dry-ass meat. Your music sucks. All your culture sucks. That's why the kids listen to black people and their music. That's why the kids love Latinos. Your parties suck because they're monochromatic. Our parties have better food, better music, better looking women. You have lost.
All right. So, if that doesn't sort of brighten your day, I don't know what will, really. Now, I don't want to say this is emblematic of this. I don't even know what nationality this guy is. He's just speaking for brown people, right? He's the spokesperson of the brown people. And I don't think that's reasonable to really do. It's not like he's actually speaking for all brown people. And I think that for the most part, like he said, he has traveled across the country and encounters all sorts of different brown folks. And I have too. And we have a great time and I get to enjoy their food and whatever else, right? So I'm not trying to say that this is truly representative of the opinions of the monolithic ethnic group. I think it's always good to say that and fully understand it. Also, it's hard to not watch this and first feel attacked, right? He's talking to white American people, really just white people, fully, saying your culture sucks, that you've lost. And there's sort of two paradigms that you can exist in. You can exist in the liberal paradigm, which is all about individualism. You don't treat groups of people as monolithic blocks. You judge an individual based on their actions, not based off of the actions of people that are like them or the actions of their parents, right? All that. So there's liberal individualism, which is what we're accustomed to in the West, right? That is the mindset that I certainly was raised with. And then you're confronted with this different mindset, which is very ethnically divided of okay, there's brown people and white people and Chinese people and Jews, and that those are meaningful, just to say that those are meaningful dividing lines, right? And not only are those meaningful dividing lines, but you guys suck and you lost, right? Just having a finger pointed in your face and saying you lost and you suck ignites that fire, even if you didn't care before 5 seconds ago. You watch this video, it's hard not to get angry and start to think, yeah, I'm going to engage in that same dynamic. And I first found this video when Dave Smith was talking about it, and he said a lot of the same thing, right? Like, if we're going to live in a liberal, multicultural society, great, but we can't do that. We can't do whatever this is. And even though that this attitude is not, or might not be representative of the common person in the brown people group, I think it is, at this point, I do feel that extremists define a group and also shape history in an important way. It's not the 99% of normies who don't engage in inflammatory rhetoric and just are trying to like go to work and hang out that are contributing to this dialogue. Sure, maybe they're the common case, but in a real sense, people like this and other extremists are driving the conversation, and they will drive the events of history moving forward. So that's why I'm paying attention to it. That's why I'm highlighting it. I know it's negative, and it's okay, why are you highlighting this video? I'm highlighting it because obviously this is, let's say, an extremist in the brown people group, in the same way that maybe jihadist Muslims are the extremists that are a minority in the whole group of Muslims. But at the same time, the actions of the extremists there drive history, right? And let me take a sip of my tea here, soothe my throat. And I was thinking maybe I should bring up some videos of Nick Fuentes and Mark Levin. Mark Levin's just like a Jewish, I don't know, he's on Fox News, he's in the White House. I don't know what he does. He's just one of those boomers that are just sort of around and talk a lot. But there's extremists in each group. And Nick Fuentes, he very often expresses this reaction of, well, if there are all these other groups, if there are immigrants that are acting as an insular ethnic group, and there's Jews that are acting as an insular ethnic group. But when white people even begin to think or have some sort of reaction that's like, how do we survive in this environment where there's a ton of immigration, millions of immigrants, like this guy is saying, flooding into the country? And, they treat ethnicity as a meaningful distinction, right? And of course, white people were part of the West, gave birth to the West, and were brought up according to liberal values of individualism that you don't associate with your ethnic group as a meaningful group identity. You're not supposed to be proud of being white. You're not supposed to discriminate based on race, like all of these things. Nick Fuentes' reaction is, well, this doesn't work. Like, how does this possibly end other than the extinction of all white people? And, this is not something you would say, but truly, like, even if something is the right belief, just assessing the landscape, assessing the dynamics, and making basic predictions, it's obvious to see when something is a self-extinguishing belief or ideology, right? Like, just a simple example. Let's say I have the belief that it's wrong to have children, right? For whatever. I'm an antinatalist. I think it's wrong to bring children into the world because the world is full of suffering. Okay, great. So I believe that. Maybe there's 100 other people that believe the same thing. None of us have children because we believe it's wrong. And maybe we're right. And in 100 years, that belief has extinguished itself because none of us reproduced, and we couldn't pass it along. It's not very compelling, and also we all died out. So I think it's good to talk about what's right and wrong, but at the moment I'm just sort of analyzing the dynamics here. I think it's obvious to see that in the West you have those different extremists that are kind of forcing their ethnic lens of things, whether that's the Jewish group that's saying, okay, well, we need to have a protected ethno-state called Israel, and essentially, the warring factions in the Middle East, they all treat ethnicity as being meaningful, and it has both ethnic and religious ties for them. There's that group, or maybe there's this New York Times op-ed contributor who's kind of inflaming those same racial distinctions. And I think that they're driving the social group dynamics at the moment, and it's not going to dissipate. Sure, they're a minority, they are extremists, but they're driving the group dynamics moving forward. It's the reality. And, I'm not going to play any Nick Fuentes clips, but honestly, if you want any idea of what's going on culturally and politically, you need to be watching some Nick Fuentes. Some good tea. And also, by the way, if you're kind of still hung up on the last 10, 15 years of what cultural politics has been, like if you're still talking about the patriarchy, if you're still talking about white privilege, it's not cool. It's definitely not cool anymore. But I think that you've lost the plot. You are not on the trail anymore. I think the cultural referendum has occurred. If you want to keep pursuing those belief systems or framing the world in that way, you can. But I think, it's very much, it's self-extinguishing. I think a lot of that is choosing to lean into all of those ideas about woke social justice and how the fundamental dynamics of society are that of just internalized stereotypes and white privilege and women being suppressed, and that's the reason why all suffering exists. Like if you really believe that still and continue to lean into it, it's self-extinguishing because like it doesn't lead you into like a nice happy marriage where you have kids and reproduce and all that, right? Like modernity, generally speaking, kind of is correlated with lower birth count. Whatever, for better or for worse, it's a little bit self-extinguishing, and also it's not driving the conversation anymore. So whatever, that's neither here nor there. Good luck if you're still excited or that conversation still energizes you. But I feel like truly at this point, it has no currency. So I think the question is, where do we go from here? And personally, individually, what do we do? There's extremists driving this conversation. There's heightening ethnic divisions, mostly in the West between, West and a little bit of the East, right? It's not like Asians. It's Middle Eastern people, Jews and Christians, right? Muslims, Jews, and Christians. The three warring factions. And it's not going away because people are highly motivated by their religious and ethnic backgrounds. I think like while modern liberalism does provide peaceful, stable societies, secular societies, there's also, it's just not nearly as compelling as the concept that like you have a homeland, like thinking of Israel. It's clearly so meaningful to have a homeland that you can go back to. I was watching an interview with Jerry Seinfeld and Barry Weiss, two just like modern secular Jews, and they're talking about visiting Israel, and they are on the verge of tears with how meaningful it was to them to go to a place where everyone shared their culture, but also was like them and had the shared history, and they couldn't really articulate it. They stopped talking and looked at each other and were about to cry. Like it was so moving to them to have a connection to their ethnic history and religious background, all of that, even as non-religious people. So clearly, like, great, modern secular society is peaceful, stable, and wonderful, but it's not nearly as compelling as people finding a connection to their ethnic and religious heritage. And me, I don't even know what that would feel like. I grew up fully convinced that it didn't matter. Completely individualistic, so individualistic that I didn't have like school pride or national pride, right? None of that. I didn't care about our sports teams. I didn't even like the American flag. The Pledge of Allegiance felt culty to me, right? All of this. I had no affinity for a group. But now I'm just sort of realizing that, okay, that is a relatively shallow existence compared to whatever these people are experiencing. So that's interesting. That's definitely interesting. I'm not about to go join a whites-only commune. They seem like nerds. But it is interesting. And I think it's an indication that like the ethnic and religious dynamics are going to be the things that drive the conversation and that drive the events of history. And truly, the people like, the Ezra Kleins, the Pod Save America bros, the liberal, and I don't mean liberal like left-leaning, liberal in terms of modern individualistic Western thinking, commentariat, the people who they're very smart and they know a lot of stuff and they'll have their podcasts and they'll try to figure out what's going on and they'll say a lot of words, but ultimately they will be completely ineffectual. Like the only thing that is driving people's behavior is religious and ethnic backgrounds as a bottom line. I think that's clear. And the problem is like what happens when you embrace ethnic groupings is, we live in a multiracial country. We can't just say, okay, well, people are going to find a meaningful identification with their ethnic group. That's all fine and dandy. We'll just let them separate and, free association. That's the new polite term for basically just saying like, well, black people really like to live around black people. White people like to live around white people. They'll all just self-sort. Like, I think people already do that. But anything beyond just a very subtle, maybe cultural and individual decision like free association thing, any attempt to ethnically like manage the people. I mean, you can sort of look at Israel and Palestine as like how this just doesn't resolve itself. There's two groups of people who are living way too close together and they hate each other and they're not going to get along. They don't want a one-state solution, They need to be in separate places. And I don't know how that's going to work. And the problem is the U.S. is full of all different races. And if we start to play this game or lean into this mindset that it's one ethnic group versus another, violence is the only real outcome. Like we have the benefit of history at this point. So there's this concept of like Balkanization, which is a reference to the Balkans, which I think it was like, they lived in a mountainous area. The Balkans lived in a mountainous area. And so these different people groups were much more segregated, essentially. And what happens when you do that is you have smaller tribes that don't communicate quite as much with the other tribes. And then there's just a lot of fighting. It never gets resolved. But yeah, we have lots of examples of countries who maybe begin some process of like, okay, white people are going to be over there, black people are going to be over there. Everyone's on the same page. But it always gets violent. It always gets violent. No matter how cheery and optimistic it starts, it just doesn't seem to go very well. It doesn't seem to go well. So I think you almost have the moral obligation to say, we're not really going to try that. I think letting people freely associate is great and important, but it's got to be a real gentle touch on the gas pedal before things get violent. I don't know what's going to happen in whatever, Michigan, Minnesota, wherever the Somali community is. That's the powder keg. Trump can say that they're all garbage, but they're not going anywhere. You can't humanely just deport a bunch of people, send them back to their home country. It just doesn't work in a humane way. Even ICE's attempt to deport millions of immigrants that came in the last couple years, like even a couple years old, that process has proven to be kind of beyond the pale. It's beyond what we find palatable. Raiding Home Depots and just essentially what looks like random abductions, random violent mass abductions of people based on race. Like, it's too much for polite society to watch in good conscience. Like, it just doesn't work. So we can't do that. I don't know what the outcome is going to be for these concentrated ethnic groups that are in the US. I think largely, like, white people are getting more and more sick of it. And, and here's the last key. Here's the last piece that's disturbing. The moral compass of the last, 100 years has essentially been defined by Hitler being Satan and some sort of modern secularized individualism, which maybe is associated and stems from Christianity, but is not directly tied to it. At least in people's minds, it's not directly tied to it. That's the definition of good. Hitler's the definition of evil. This is the framework, this is the moral compass that has guided the last 100 years. And also, culturally, we've kind of layered on some additional social justice stuff of, what is good and correct to feel and believe and say, especially around race and gender. And it's kind of just hit a breaking point where, like I said earlier, clearly it's just morally bankrupt. Like, these perspectives are morally bankrupt. If that's the people, if that's the group of people who are espousing all of those rules, this is what it means to be a good person, clearly they don't know what they're talking about. Clearly all of the things that we're supposed to be ashamed of don't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything to be called anti-Semitic anymore. Like, Miss Rachel was nominated as Anti-Semite of the Year. And it's if that's not the nail in the coffin of, these labels meaning anything, I don't know what is, right? So we got all these, the entire kind of secular moral compass of the West shattered. And in some sense, it's freeing, and I think nature is healing a little bit, even in terms of, I think in a weird way, some race relations in America are improving as a consequence of this shaking off of a decrepit and maligned moral compass. I think that the whole racial injustice stuff, while it has some valid points, it honestly just made race relations between white and black people worse. It's made things weird and tense and awkward, and nobody likes it, and we all just kind of want to hang out, okay? Seriously. I feel like there's some ways in which nature is healing as a consequence. But the bad part is that, the majority of the population, who they don't do a lot of philosophizing on their own, they don't have a strong religious framework or whatever moral framework that guides their beliefs and actions, they were really depending on social norms to guide their behavior. And as soon as everyone kind of feels like, wow, those are all bankrupt, I guess I can do anything now. That's pretty dangerous. Like I said, those two things are happening at the same time. Nature is healing a little bit from the release of that kind of oppressive quote unquote morality. But I think a lot of people feel freed to not have any shame anymore because they don't have any internal shame. And they feel like, oh, well, the things that society is shaming me for are meaningless. So I should just simply proceed with what I think is true and good with no shame whatsoever. And I'll tell you what, the Instagram, the YouTube comments are not good. There's a lot of, and I've seen it progress over the last 3-4 months plus, from a lot of just more mild anti-Semitic stuff So now I'm seeing comments that are literally just like, kill all Jews. There's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of people that are done with any feelings of shame. And I don't know what the outcome, I mean, I don't know. Of course, we kind of know what the outcome is there, but it's a big wave, and I don't know if I'm the only one seeing it. I don't know if it's just because these are how my algorithms are shaped. I'm a white male in his 20s. Of course, like a lot of this stuff is targeted towards me, or simply resonates with my demographic, right? Maybe it's just because I'm in that small segment of people that I'm seeing it. But it seems pretty significant. And of course, highly motivated young men are not a force, it's nothing to sneeze at. They have the ability to do some meaningful things in society. So that is, of course, the downside of the dissipation of this moral framework where Hitler was the definition of evil and all that. So it's tough. I don't want that. I don't want to join that team and go down that road. But I have two options. I can invest in the original liberal project, which is essentially the colorblind thing. I mean, I think we were all kind of sick of hearing the idea that like you could be colorblind to race. But that's really it, right? That's really it. That's Martin Luther King Jr. I have a dream that my children will be judged for their actions, the content of their character, rather than the color of their skin. Like, that is genuinely the definition of colorblind. And when you have that attitude about the other citizens in your society, the other people you interact with, it really just feels like you're one and you're together. And honestly, like I said, I already feel like nature is healed a bit, and my interactions with other races, just like strangers at the store and cash registers, whatever, it just feels more healed in a weird way. It just feels like there's a sense of human camaraderie that's returned when we're not always focused on the division between black and white people and all that. So there's that. I could invest in that and then just sort of try as best as I can, in spite of the fact that there's massive coalitions of the Nick Fuentes, the Wahat Ali, the Mark Levins of the world that are kind of doubling down and like saying, well, identity matters to people. Racial, ethnic identity matters to people, and that drives the dynamics of the world. Like, I think there's a lot of people that will be in those groups. And maybe there'll be a group of people that care enough about the whole like colorblind project to combat that. Because I think that would be great. I think it would be great to just be in a group of people who wanted to make society good and prosperous and make good things and live peacefully. That would be great. And there's something that's energizing about that for me. I don't know if other people are going to find that energizing enough to make it a real political force. I don't know. We'll see. I feel like maybe that's 10% of people, 10, 20, maybe 30. I don't think so, though. I think it's 10 to 20% of people that are that would be on my team there to just say, I don't care what race we are. I'm just going to work hard and be nice and ignore the bullshit and be kind. That's what I'm going to do, Because if I can't be on that team, like, I don't know, I guess I'll hide. I guess I'll hide as a race war unfolds outside. And, I'm very committed to nonviolence and essentially like hope I don't get targeted. Hope I don't encounter some racial violence, essentially just try to defend myself and other people who are immediately near me who might be in danger. I watched the Bondi Beach videos where there's that Syrian refugee who tackled one of the gunmen. And It was it was incredible. It was beautiful. I loved the heroism and the balls to just get that guy, wrestle a gun away from a person out in the open, just run up to them and wrestle the gun away successfully. Well done. Essentially that sort of situation. Just like, no matter, disregarding all group politics, whatever. Like, if you see violence, you stop it in person. And that's essentially the degree of engaging with this whole, race war that I would even want to do. But we'll see, It's tough. I'm not going to be on the Brown team. They won't take me. What am I going to do? Not Jewish. I sure hope there's enough people out there that just want to work hard and be kind to each other and build a great society. I'm 28 years old. I'm energized by the idea that we could build a great society again. There's a lot to be resentful for. There's a lot to complain about. You could complain about the Federal Reserve. You can complain about boomers just hoarding houses. You could complain about a lot. But I'm truly energized by this idea that there's a lot of intelligent and hardworking people in America. And you know what? Maybe I can't fix the world, but I know that I can swim upstream. And I can point myself in the right direction. And I know that I can do good in my community and in my personal relationships and work towards a great society, a good one. I'm not going to retreat. The whole Christian thing of like retreating from society and just saying, oh, well, we serve the kingdom of heaven, not the kingdom of earth. We don't have an allegiance to the countries that are here. It just feels very like it's just cowardice. It's a cop-out. It's a bunch of people who did nothing to solve the problems of their time. And we're left with the fallout of that, right? Whatever, I can take it. Let's hope. So that's the team I'm on. I think it'll make for a meaningful life. We might not be able to fix the world, might not be able to fix America, but we'll do our best. All right, my tea's gone. I hope you have a good night, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.